Welcome to a production from HRT Northwest, Reimagining Human Resources. I have here Randy Boek with Route 2 Results, and I'm really excited to get a chance to see Randy again. Randy and I have known each other for many years and worked on clients together. But a little first about HRT Northwest. We are an HR services firm when we serve clients throughout Washington State, Oregon, and then we have a number of clients with a significant presence in California as well. And we help our clients on a range of HR related matters. Today, I'm talking to Randy about leadership because I'm interested in exploring topics related to HR and topics related to leadership. And Randy is a leadership expert. So I'm very excited to have Randy here. Thanks for being here, Randy.
Well, good morning, Wendi. I'm honored that you invited me. Thank you.
You bet. This is our very first podcast. So we'll see where this goes, but I'm very happy that you were able to join for this first one. Now, today, what type of clients do you work with typically?
Our sweet spot, and I say our because I have a partner in Oregon who works with me, Jillian. We've worked together for over 20 years. I have another partner in Richard in Colorado. He and I work together on specific clients. The sweet spot is privately held organizations that produce products and services of value. So my ideal client is the CEO, CFO, COO of a fast-growing, privately held company. We have done work with other very large Fortune 100, Fortune 10 companies, but the sweet spot is really privately held, generally in the 30 million to a couple $100 million range, 1,000 employees, 100 employees, somewhere in that range. The client is generally a C-level executive, and we work with their direct reports with them and with others in leadership positions in the organization. So our focus is helping them define the future and then build the leadership capacity to achieve that future.
Great. That's fantastic. When it comes to leadership, what do you see as the main components of great leadership?
There's two things that I kind of see are umbrellas over much of what we do, and that is helping leaders with their accountability for creating clarity and unity. Clarity so people understand what the organization's purpose is, what the vision for the future is. Unity so people can work collaboratively together to make it happen. And within that, there are things like having a clear vision. You know, what is the future that we're trying to achieve? Being able to build a community of trust where people can work collaboratively. And I don't mean a community of trust where tempers don't flare, there isn't conflict, but where people work through those conflicts because of their commitment to something bigger and better and being a part of something bigger and better. I think also leaders have to make sure that people are very clear on what the expectations are and how those expectations and performance against them will be evaluated. The best leaders that I have known in my career were also optimists. If you think about the last year, COVID-19 and all the challenges that leaders have had in the last year, people have had to deal with some real crisis, both financial crisis, personal crisis, et cetera. Leaders are the ones that believe it will be better in the future and convey that confidence that things can and will be better to others. Nobody wants to work with a boss or a leader who is negative. Nobody wants to be around people who are only seeing the sky as falling. And so, the best leaders, they're open and honest about what's going on, but they convey an optimism for the future and have a plan for how we're going to get there.
So have you ever had a client who wasn't an optimist, and were you able to help them get a different perspective? Have you ever run into that?
I don't see people too often that rise to the C-level in an organization without having a degree of optimism.
Okay.
Because I think optimism tends to be connected to drive and perseverance. And I think people can learn to be more optimistic people can, if they see the damage that pessimism is doing. But I'm not in the therapy business. I'm
Yeah.
a leadership consultant. I'm an executive facilitator, and a lot of what we do is help leaders gain a level of self-awareness. So, sometimes a leader may not understand how they're conveying pessimism and may not
Mhm.
want to convey pessimism, and really gets a wake-up call when they understand and realize that they are conveying pessimism. And
Mm.
some can change. Some, it's such an ingrained part of who they are based on the life they've lived, based on how they grew up, et cetera, that they can't make the change.
Yeah. Right. Very interesting. Well, there's a lot there. You said the main two components were clarity and unity, right? And then you went in and talked about those two kind of key aspects. But I agree with you in my work in terms of what I see, that those two pieces are fundamental. And I think that they sound simple, but I think both of them are not easy, and particularly the clarity piece of it, I think can be difficult for organizations and leaders to make sure that expectations are really clear. So I'm glad you brought those two pieces up. I think that's really important.
Well, and I think the other thing for that, Wendy, is that you have to start at the top of the organization, and
Mm-hmm.
once those are achieved with the direct reports of the C-level executive, then it has to flow from the top floor down through the shop floor. And
Mm-hmm.
so, there's a next level of learning for that senior executive team to learn how to convey clarity and unity from the top floor to the shop floor.
Right. Do you think in larger organizations, because you mentioned you work with some that are on the smaller side and you work with organizations that are thousands of employees, does it get more difficult to be clear and make sure that messaging does flow down to all employees when the organization is really large and complex?
Well, one of the reasons we prefer to work with small privately held organizations is because decision making can be much faster
Yeah.
than with large corporate entities. The bureaucracy can be much less. We can challenge and improve politics and bureaucracy in a smaller company by working directly with the C-level executives and their direct reports, more so than we can in a Fortune 500 company, Fortune 100 company. And in all honesty, even though we work with companies that are very, very large, we have generally don't work with the CEO. I mean, I've never met Bill Gates, for example.
Right.
I've never met Henry Ford, for example. So in those very large companies, we may work at a division level or an individual plant that is owned by a much larger organization. So, you've got
Mhm.
to be working with the person who is in charge of whatever entity you're working with to create the kind of growth and change and development that we're focused on facilitating.
Mhm. In your experience, when there's a company that doesn't meet some of these ideals of great leadership, what do you think fundamentally holds them back from meeting these ideals?
Oh, I mean, there's a complicated mix sometimes.
Mm.
And the reality is that it rests with the C-level executive and the C-level team. And it's fairly common that we will work with a new executive in an organization who's in their first year in that organization, and they've joined the organization. They've been hired to produce some significant results fairly quickly, and they realize that there has to be changes in the behavior of leaders in order to create the changes in business results that they are expected to deliver fairly quickly. So,
Mm.
we start with assessment, which and when I say assessment, I'm not talking about agree, strongly disagree, numerical online assessment. I'm talking about sitting down and talking with people face to face, being able to drill down on the things that people say and understand why they feel the way they do, why they think the way they do, not just what they think, what they feel. And, that
Mm.
gives our client sponsor, which once again is usually C-level executive, a perspective that they may not have. You know, there's always things that are in people's mind that aren't solicited usually, and that people are uncomfortable saying to their boss. We are able to get at the real truth as to what's going on. So,
Mm.
rather than selling a product at the outset, we don't sell a product. We sell value. We sell perspective. We sell skills and tools to improve leadership and organizational performance. But, I'm not in an organization selling communications training or conflict resolutions training. I mean, we may use tools like that, but really
Right.
we are focused on the outcome of whatever we do. And so it's very important to us on the front end to make sure we have done our discovery process so we really know what the right thing is to do to help the organization improve.
Hmm. Right. Instead of just the client calling you and saying, "Will you do communications training with us?" I can see that you would want to back up and say, "Well, let's talk about why you feel like that's necessary. Let's talk about what's going on in your company, and like you say, make sure that you're actually solving the right problem."
Yeah, yeah, and generally it's not communications training standalone is hardly even a band-aid on the reason why an organization doesn't communicate well.
Right. I'm sure we could go on and about all of that for a long time here. So, um, in your mind, how does a healthy, successful leadership team interact? And can you contrast that with an unhealthy team? What does that look like?
Some years back, and you've probably seen this in your career too, it was common for organizations to have these stupid, pithy quotes about leadership hanging on the wall with pictures of mountains and pictures of boats and people
Mm-hmm.
and sayings like there is no I in team. That
Right.
is probably one of the stupidest motivational posters that ever existed in the history of teams. And the reason I say that is because ineffective teams dumb down the individuality of team members and dumb down opinions that don't fit with the conventional wisdom. We're in a fast changing world. Things are
Mm-hmm.
different tomorrow than they were yesterday. And if we don't extract the best thinking of every member on the team and the best possible contribution of the brain power of our people, we fall behind. So if you create a homogeneous team where everybody thinks alike, everybody's drank the Kool-Aid,
Mm-hmm.
nobody is willing to stand up to the boss when they disagree, you're wasting a lot of brain power and a lot of potential of an organization. So, ineffective teams are teams where people can't get emotional, where people can't disagree, where people can't have hard discussions, but they have a level of trust that exists on the team that says that everybody has positive intent. And if
Mm-hmm.
Wendi disagrees with what Mary says is the direction we need to go, Wendi gets heard. Her opinion gets considered. It may not be agreed to. The boss still gets to make the decision, but the opinions are heard of everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't get offended when their opinion isn't the one that directs where the company goes. Being heard and not having your opinion be accepted as the right direction is different than feeling as though you can't even offer your opinion. Unhealthy teams make it so that people can't disagree.
Yeah. And I liked that earlier in the as we first started talking, you discussed the importance of conflict and that people can disagree with each other, and that's actually really healthy and positive. So I'm glad that you made that distinction. There's when it comes to HR, that's my area. That's something that I've been working in for at least 20 years now. So when it comes to human resources as a function, there seems to be a lot of different definitions of HR. There's an employee advocate. It could be a management resource. It could be a liaison between managers and employees. It could be considered more of an admin function, make sure people are enrolled in benefits, for example. But I'm curious, from your perspective, what do you see as HR's main role in an organization?
Hmm. I think HR activities fluctuate on a situational day-to-day basis. And I think tactical HR too frequently is what HR is identified with. I think the main role of
Mhm.
HR in the organization is to serve the operation, to serve those who are moving the business forward on a production side, on the marketing side, and to serve them as a peer and an equal. Uh, so not necessarily by being subordinate, by being a trusted business partner. So, for example, sometimes what I see happen is operating executives will try to turn all people related issues over to HR. Well, you're the human resources department, so you're responsible for the people. Well, no, every leader is responsible for their people. And so I think that one thing that HR has to do, number one, is realize that their purpose is to help those who manage and lead the people who are doing production, doing admin, doing the other roles in the company to manage those people, provide them with some skills and tools and perspective. I think the other thing, and this is a mistake that I see a lot of HR people make, is that in most of my small organizations that I work with that have internal HR, the HR person reports to the general manager, the CEO, the president, the senior executive of the company.
Mhm.
And HR frequently can get distracted and presume that their team is their HR group or their team is the organizational group they're connected to, when in reality, if you report to the top of the organization, your number one team is that top team that runs the organization. And
Hmm.
your number one loyalty, your number one stopping point in, or starting point rather, in how you think is to your commitment to that number one team that runs the business.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. I like that. And I think that we've talked in the past about the fact that HR probably looks different depending on the company in terms of HR's function and what HR's role is going to be, depending on maybe what the CEO has set in place. If the CEO has set a certain strategy, do you agree?
Well, yeah. I mean, the far be it from me to tell individual CEO that there's only one way to run
Hmm.
HR. However, that said, I would say that a CEO, a GM, a president gets the HR leader that they deserve.
Hmm.
And so, if all you expect, and in small companies, sometimes the HR person isn't really a professional HR person. They're a person that came from
Hmm.
somewhere else and they started doing the tactical role of HR, and the CEO has no expectation of them to participate in resource planning or future human resource strategy for the growth of the business, or to integrate people with the growth of the business, anticipate talent, all those sorts of things that a more strategic HR person may do. Some organizations don't expect that of their HR, nor do they have an HR person that has the level of education, experience, and skill to do that.
Hmm.
Um,
Right.
and honestly, some smaller clients. If I think of my span as being companies, like right now, my smallest company is around a $10 million company. My largest is a $200 million company. A $10 million company is probably not going to have an in-house HR person that
Hmm.
is an educated, skilled, experienced professional HR person. They can't afford it. They don't need it. And
Right.
your business provides a wonderful service to those people because they can
Hmm.
purchase what they need of somebody with your education, skill, and talent for strategic decisions, and to help them with the strategic HR, and even with the tactical if they need it.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
they don't have the same need for HR that a $100 million company might have, or a $50 million company might have,
Yeah.
with 600 employees, 500 employees. So, I think what has happened that I've observed the last 10 years is HR as a profession has really come into its own
Hmm.
and has gained respect that it didn't have 20 years ago. And
Yeah.
most of the CEOs that I work with who have HR people, the HR person reports directly to the CEO or the GM, and
Hmm.
they trust them with all sorts of people related issues to provide guidance, to keep them out of jail, to provide a higher level of thinking about engagement with people.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I certainly have also seen and experienced, the HR person reporting into the chief financial person as well. And I think that can also work if that CFO person is really well aligned also with operations. And they work really closely with the COO and the CEO to make sure that the whole operation is working well. But yeah, I think I like what you said earlier about the HR is really involved in helping the operations run well, because I think that's right. I think that's a big piece of the role, and I think that's what HR has kind of realized over the years, is that's where HR can provide a lot of value and a lot of help to the entire organization.
Well, and I think where HR reports sends a message to the organization as to how HR is valued. And I think that the discipline has struggled with the right name terminology forever. It used to be called personnel, very impersonal personnel.
Yeah.
Then then it became human resources. Okay, so people are resources to the organization. We talk about human capital. We talk about talent management. One of the ones that I like most, there's a fellow named Lauren Rubis, and I got to know him a little bit when he was the CEO of a company in Bellingham. Don't even remember the name of the company, but he was a really interesting fellow. He had been a manager of a professional hockey team. He's a Canadian guy. When he left this manufacturing company, he went to work for a financial firm in Canada. I don't remember what part of Canada, maybe Quebec. But in any case, he became their chief people officer. And his focus during I think he was there for 10 years or so, his focus was on really helping the organization be people oriented and learn to be people centered and learn to integrate that with the processes necessary to run the business, with the growth focus of the business and the profitability necessary to the business. He was a C-level executive member of that financial services firm with the accountability for integrating people, not human resources, not personnel, people. That gives a little different perspective on what we're talking about. And too often, historically, this has changed much over the last 15, 20 years.
I agree.
Historically, it was common for CEOs to say, oh, all that touchy-feely stuff, that's HR. I don't deal with that. I run a business.
Right.
Well, wait a minute. Would you be successful without the 500 people that produce your product, ship your product, deliver your product? Well, no, they are important, but boy, I hate all that HR stuff. It's just constant headaches. Well, maybe you ought to look at how you run your business if dealing with your people is constant headaches, because you're simply not going to be successful if you don't deal well with your people. And it's really a disconnect to presume people that aren't treated well in an organization are going to treat customers well.
Yeah, I think that's really true. That's definitely been my experience as well. When you look at HR and leadership within an organization, between the managers, the CEO, the human resources function, and the people who work within HR, who do you feel should own, quote unquote, employee issues? And you mentioned that sometimes you have the person who says, HR is so messy. So who should own that employee messiness that sometimes does occur?
Owning the employee issues is the leader in that employee part of the organization. Okay. So if it's an issue with a production employee, the ownership is first the supervisor, then the department manager, whatever the hierarchy is in the organization. Owning the issue is with leadership. Human resources is, and using that term, even though it's not my favorite term, is the resource to help make that happen. I don't believe it's okay for a manager to come to the HR person and say, I've got a problem with this employee here. Now it's your problem. Well, no, it's your problem. As an HR person, the HR person can help resolve it, can expand the leader's thinking, can provide them with tools, help them understand the legal ramifications. But I don't think the accountability for that problem getting resolved rests with HR. I think it rests with the hierarchy within that part of the organization. Sometimes these issues are so complex with such big implications that they need to go all the way to the top of the organization. The HR person may facilitate that happening because the decisions are far reaching within the organization. They sometimes need to go up the hierarchy.
Yeah, I think that's right. I do. As a profession, what do you think HR could do better?
I think be better business people,
Mm.
and understand that as an HR executive, you are a business person who is helping to integrate the way that people are led and managed with growth of the organization, with profit-driven nature of the organization, so that people are satisfied, so that turnover is reduced, so you get and keep the best possible people, the most talented people, and to help to orchestrate that.
Yeah.
And I think it can't be done in a vacuum. It has to be done in the reality of running a profitable business, running a growing business.
Mm.
Yeah, sometimes profitability may take precedent over what we really want to do with people. Leaders have to make difficult decisions that don't always work to the best interest of employees. And I think how we treat employees overall gives us credibility in the bank when we have to make a decision that isn't the decision we would like to make. I've sat with CEOs making very difficult decisions when they just couldn't afford to keep everybody on the payroll because of the circumstances that existed. It's painful. Some CEOs will brag about firing people, and sometimes CEOs will threaten people with firing them if they don't perform better. I've not seen any CEO, and I wouldn't want to work with a CEO that took pride in firing people.
Mm.
And I've had a client that it hasn't been painful having to cut people, even people with performance problems, because good leaders have empathy. They understand that they do hold a family's livelihood in their hands, and they do have accountability for that.
No.
And when a person doesn't perform, generally when it gets to the point the person is terminated, they still don't enjoy doing it, but it's something that's necessary that has to be done for the good of the business. And, if we're talking about termination, sometimes it goes on too long. Sometimes people are given too many chances.
Yeah, I agree. And sometimes that's what I end up doing is having dialogue with leaders who I've seen struggle with working with a person for too many years, and it's just not working, and it's too difficult on that employee, and it's too difficult on the organization itself. So sometimes I have those conversations about this just doesn't seem to be working.
Yeah, it's, sometimes the most kind thing we can do is help somebody move on with their life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because it's obvious they're not happy, they're not satisfied, they're not doing well in their position, and we prolong their pain and the organization's pain, and in the process the credibility of the executive suffers because everybody around this person knows that they're not pulling their weight and expects the executive to do something about it, and the longer they let it slide, the more their credibility is damaged.
Exactly. And it can create extreme stress in that person, especially if they know they're not a good fit for that job. But I appreciate that you also said it's still really important that we have empathy for that person, because it's always hard when it's not their decision to move on. And I think finding ways to let them leave with dignity as much as possible is incredibly important. I often try to help when it's possible there to be options in that when we get to that point where it's just clear someone has to move on, that we give options to the person as if it's possible, so that even if it's options around small things like how to gather their belongings, just giving them some dignity as they leave and help them to save some face as they walk out the door. I think it's so important that we do that whole process with respect for that individual person.
Yeah. I have, if you'll indulge me, I have a very short story that happened many, many years ago when I was in the corporate world. I got a fairly significant promotion and I inherited a person who was a secretary. That was back in the days when people had secretaries, a
Yeah.
term that's pretty much gone away.
Yeah.
But anyway, she was quite unhappy uh, when I became her boss, unhappy with the organization because prior bosses had promised her things that were never delivered.
Mm.
And so she was angry. And so, I had a discussion with her initially, and she said, she was promised she could do some things and wasn't, and then it didn't get done. And so I said, okay, so, your performance isn't okay now. And here's what needs to change. And I said, if you can make these changes, then, I will be willing. In fact, I'll even lead with this. I'll let you take accountability for this other thing that you want to do, but you have to make these changes in your behavior.
Mm.
And so she did. And over the first year, we had really good results. And then she got a bee in her bonnet and her performance just went way downhill. We talked about it. Long story short, I terminated her. And what I said is that, it's obvious you're not happy here. Your performance isn't acceptable to me or the other people you serve. You're surly with people, you're rude to people. And, I simply can't have you in our organization anymore. I wish you well. And anyway, so what happened 3 years later, out of the blue, I got a card from her.
Mm.
And she said, I just wanted to thank you. I've moved to Florida. I've changed careers entirely. And that would not have happened if you had allowed me to stay in a comfortable position that I wasn't happy in just because I needed the income. And so that really taught me that when somebody's not a fit, you need to deal with it sooner rather than later.
Yeah, like you said, for everybody's sake. That's a good story. So that is the end of the questions that I had. I would love for you to tell folks how they could get a hold of you and plug your business so that people know what great value you and Route 2 results are able to provide.
Great. Well, thank you. So, I think people have probably gotten a sense of that through all the great questions that you asked me and through my ramblings in responding to them. The company's name is Route 2 INC. You can find me on LinkedIn, Randy Boek, Boek. You can find me at my website, route2results.com, or you can give me a call, 425-359-8506. We work with a few clients every year. We're selective and only work with clients when we believe we can provide significant value to a situation that they need significant change applied to. Our main focus is facilitating growth in leadership teams, and helping leaders define their future. So that's it. And, I'm happy to talk with anybody. And maybe there's a fit, maybe there's not. And anybody who's interested in having a chat, give me a call. Happy to talk with you.
Great. Thank you so much for joining me, Randy. I really appreciate it. And you mentioned a 425 number, which for people who don't know, who might be elsewhere in the country, that's in the Seattle area. You work with clients outside of the Seattle area?
Yes. I've worked in Germany, Italy, Australia, Spain, and have worked with leaders from 14 different countries. So, we work with a certain type of leader, not a certain kind of company, even though our clients have included manufacturers, aerospace companies, wine producers, electronics companies, technology companies. I think over the years that I've been in business, we've worked in most industry segments. I care more about the type of leader we work with than I do the industry segment.
That's great. Well, thanks again, Randy. Very much appreciated.
Thanks, Wendi. Always a pleasure.